So a little bit about kind of kicking things off, talk a little bit about the IXDA. As you guys know, if we have any new members joining us, I know we got people from India and different places. I don't know, Jonathan, did we enabled the chat for everyone or the messaging, or only a few people can talk? It seems like there was a few people that were muted.
You see, yeah, seems like mostly everyone's muted.
That's fine. So Jonathan, will be helping us with a lot of the actual conversations. If you have a question, anything else, please feel free to kind of put it in the chat. And we're super excited. I think the last couple sessions that we've had, I think it was an understatement. Usually, Claudia, when we talked about this, we've done 2 sessions. Just the amount of information that you've shared with us. I think this was the first one that we've done an actual 3-part series. And with everything that's going on right now, right, with the pandemic, with the different uncertainty on jobs and everything that's going on in the industry. It's great to have people like yourself and I think the community rally around some of these new trends that are happening right now, especially around accessibility. So I know you've been very gracious with your time. So we're excited to hear this third part of this third installment. And I think as we go through this process, really understanding more from like the context, the background that you kind of laid out, really looking more into the actual legality. So for those of you who were not in the last 2 sessions, we've been able to actually document and have not only the presentations, but then also Jonathan's been great in putting those kind of those highlights or the takeaways. And so definitely, recommend that you guys check that out. We've had the pleasure of having Claudio here join us in an extended format. And so we're really excited for today's session. I think this is really where all the work that's been done over the last 2 months really culminates with the actual implementation, right? I think it's great that we've learned a little bit about the actual context. I'll let Claudia speak more about that. But as it relates to IXDA and the reason why we put these events together, sometimes we do serious. Some of the ones that we've done in the past have been more around, kind of emerging technologies. We've done stuff around the whole hiring process, right? How to get ready for your career. And so this is, I think, one of the ones that we've done now, I think, since the whole coronavirus kicked off. And so we're excited to basically have this, as a way that's very practical advice. And so I think part of this process as we move forward, right, and there's going to be a couple other events that we're putting together more around continue to provide support with the community. Primarily, I think that, there's significant changes that have happened across industries, right? Whether you're in tech or you're, working for big enterprises or startups, I think we've all seen that effect. And so I think part of the role that IXDA has played, not only in terms of education, but really an extended support. And so I'm really grateful not only to the speakers, to my colleagues, Marcelo, and all the organizers that, kind of make this possible, from Jonathan to, there's just so many people that I think make this possible for all of us. But I think, moving forward, we're going to be doing a lot more of this continuation. And I think towards the end, Marcelo, I know we had talked a little bit about opening up some office hours. I know, Claudia, we discussed that as well. So definitely, we want this to be a forum. We want this to be, a communication platform, not just once a month, but really, especially during these times, right, where we have a lot of people in the community that can add value. We're going to be rolling out a couple of events, really looking at showcasing some of the talent within the community, and then more importantly, providing that ongoing support, whether that's someone looking for a job or someone looking to hire. I think there's a lot of talent out there. And so I think being able to be that bridge between community, enterprise, and everything that I think, we've seen over the last few months, really struggle. And we want to do our part to kind of contribute to that. So how do you get involved? So part of IXDA, we're it's not just the people that you see here. We're part of a much broader network. This is the local group, but this is part of a network of, I think it's over 200 groups. And there's a lot of people that we're kind of working together now in terms of bringing together a lot of the different disciplines under one organization. And so really, I think this whole process of not only, contributing or getting involved with the community, but making sure that this is done as a way of kind of bringing all the different disciplines into one. And I'm excited to basically have not only my colleagues here. I know Marcelo, there you are. This is like a group that I think started several years back, and I think it's grown substantially. We've added more members to that, and I think a way of getting involved not only in terms of hosting events but speaking. So if you have a talk, if you have, as I mentioned, something that you want to share with the community, by all means, reach out to me, reach out to Jonathan, post it on the comments. We'll be glad to kind of reach out to you. And then I think more importantly, in terms of organizing, right, if you want to be, more involved with this whole process, if you want to join us on, the different types of volunteering or leadership teams, please reach out to us and Marcelo, myself, and we'll be happy to kind of coordinate those efforts. So with that and kind of getting that out of the way, I'm excited to share with you guys, the third installment. And about our guests, I think we've shared this the last couple of sessions, but I think we're very blessed to have someone with the level of expertise, and I think one of the foremost experts on accessibility. His background, I think, speaks for himself. I think there's a lot of the work that he's doing, not only with large enterprise, but I think even some of the work that he's got going on, which hopefully he'll tell you a little more about some of his upcoming events and books and stuff that he's working on. And I think today, really the talk that we're going to be, enjoying is really more around the implementation on accessibility. So the title for today's talk is "How Can I Test My Website for Accessibility?" I think we're going to dive into the nitty-gritty in terms of how to actually make your website not only accessible, but more importantly, what tools, resources, and so forth. So with that, I'll kick it up to you, Claudio. Go ahead and kick things off, and look forward to hearing your thoughts and feedback, not only for the presentation, but also some of the stuff that you got coming up in the next couple months.
Okay. Give me just 1 second, and good. I hope I'm sharing, and I'm hoping everybody can hear me okay. So give me a thumbs up if you can hear me fine. Excellent. Good. So we do have an event coming up a week from today, which is for Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So we have an event which is going to be hosted by Bill Curtis Davidson of the XR community. So we're going to be talking a little bit next week, same time, actually no, at 5 o'clock, we're going to be talking about how people who are autistic or people who are neurodivergent can use XR to basically train themselves for employment situations, for job situations. So you're going to see this like interesting space where accessibility, people with disabilities, and XR come together towards a practical goal. So that's what we're going to be doing a week from today for Global Accessibility Awareness Day, or GAD. Tonight, we're going to be diving pretty deep into how tools work and the sort of methods and the sort of techniques that you would be using for testing for accessibility. And one of the things that'll come out of this is essentially that most of us really don't particularly do this well. So most of us, just we'll test and we'll quit before we're really finished with a sort of task or the job at hand. So part of this came out of a conversation going back and forth on LinkedIn with one of our community members from Toronto. And we kind of got into this back and forth, and we started saying, well, accessibility testing is like video games. It has all kinds of different levels to it, and most people don't get to the ninja state. They just kind of quit before then. So that's going to be kind of the presentation that we're doing, and we're going to be doing a few hands-on demos. And if you know anything about demos and Zoom or doing something online, something usually goes wrong. So we'll hit some bumps in the road. We'll try to get past them smoothly, but hopefully we'll be able to make it unscathed. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I work with a major cruise company still, and the work that I do pretty much covers all kinds of facets of digital accessibility. So part of it is for the web, part of it is for apps, augmented reality, kiosks. We work with gaming installations on our ships. So for me, it's been this amazing sort of position, being able to look at accessibility in the physical world and how it relates to the digital world, or different kinds of aspects of the digital world that go beyond the web. Tonight, we are going to be focusing specifically on the web, specifically on how you can test your website and how you can tell if your website is accessible, and the different kinds of testing that you go through. And a lot of the techniques that I'm going to be talking about tonight are actually techniques that I use pretty much daily in my work for Royal Caribbean. So really think about this as a toolbox of different tools. Now, one of the things I had done earlier today is I posted a link on Meetup with download links for some of the tools that we're going to discuss tonight, so that some of us could could get a little bit of a head start on that. If you didn't get a chance to do that, at the very end of this presentation is a resource slide. I'm going to post this deck also up on SlideShare, so you're going to be able to see download links and be able to follow on for a lot of the stuff that I'm presenting tonight. So, oh, that's interesting. Are you guys seeing a white screen or are you guys seeing an actual screen?
White.
Okay.
No.
I haven't even gotten to the demo part and we're already having issues. Go figure. Okay, so are you seeing a few browser extension tools?
Yep.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, good. So these are three of my favorite tools that I work with all the time. One of them, full disclosure, I participated in working on the Wave project, contributed design for the icons that they use in the user interface. And so that is an excellent tool for people who are just starting out in accessibility or who are, aren't really deep in terms of technical knowledge from a developer point of view. The next one that we have here is Axe, and Axe is by DQ Systems. It's an excellent application. It goes really, really in depth, and it works inside Chrome Developer Tools. So if you're comfortable working in a developer environment, you're comfortable working with Chrome Developer Tools, then you're going to find that Axe really is a good application for you. And then finally, on the enterprise level, the application that I work with the most, or should I say the platform that I work with the most, is SiteImprove. And SiteImprove, on one hand, it works like a platform. On the other hand, you can download a Chrome extension, which is the accessibility checker. So you can use that to basically check one page at a time. So there's a big difference in terms of functionality, in terms of are you checking individual pages, seeing the results on your screen and working on that, or are you scanning an entire site, taking that data and saving it into some sort of data lake or some sort of repository, and then working from it there. So SiteImprove is a platform in addition to being, so SiteImprove is an excellent platform, and SiteImprove also is a great browser extension. So you can use that both ways. I did mention Chrome Developer Tools. There is some accessibility functionality built into Chrome Developer Tools, particularly when you get into the contrast checker. And we'll be showing this a little bit later on tonight, where you can basically click on a color in Chrome Dev Tools and it'll tell you what the contrast ratio is. There are pros and cons to this approach. Again, I'll be getting to those a little bit later. And here is also one of my favorite apps. It's a paid app. It went white. Are you guys still seeing it? I think it's like if I shake the table a little bit, shake my desk a little bit, it goes white. So there must be a loose HDMI cable or something. So if we work with if you use the contrast app, it's something that you get from the Apple App Store. It works only on the Mac OS. It's $6.99. Worth absolutely every penny, and it works basically like it works like the eyedropper tool in Photoshop. So you can sample any two colors on your screen and see what the contrast ratio is between the two of them. I like this because this is probably the most accurate tool that's out there. Now, if you don't have the Mac OS or you don't have the $6.99 to spend, there's also an excellent website by Greek developer Leah Vero. And she's developed a site that essentially can give you the contrast ratio between any two colors that you have. And if you have transparency, like if you're working with RGBA or you're working with HSLA, it'll show you what that could look like. So this is also really good for trying to see how text looks over, some sort of translucent background. So it's another good tool to have in your toolbox, particularly for telling, for trying to design contrast ratios as opposed to testing them after the fact. Let me just take a.
What toolbox are you talking about?
Oh, I'm talking about the general toolbox that you would have. So the array of tools that you would use for accessibility testing.
Okay, like what?
like the tools that I'm discussing.
I joined late. What tools are you discussing?
Oh, okay. You missed Axe, you missed Wave, you missed Site Improve, you missed Contrast, and now we're getting to contrast ratio.
Okay, this sounds very boring. Goodbye.
All right. Well, at least he didn't have to stick around a long time to figure out that, you know, he didn't want that.
That's our first. That's our first Zoom noob, or
right.
what do you call them?
Right.
At least he had his clothes on.
Exactly. Zoom,
I haven't.
Zoom bombing.
I didn't even get a chance to see him,
Zoom
so
bomber,
sorry.
there you go. That's right.
Awesome. So now I can say it actually happens and not think that it's like something that the media has made up. This is great. So let's get to the core of our presentation, which is this. So accessibility testing is something that has multiple gaming. So think of all the games that you played and all the different levels that you play with it. And if there is one slide that you should take away from this, it's probably this one, which is that there's different types of testing, and there's different categories of testing and different types of testing that you use. And I actually use all 10 of these at work. And most people will probably quit after 3 or 4 of these, but we're going to go through these tonight, and we're going to talk about some of these in detail and do some demos, and we're going to look at other ones and, you know, probably a little bit more quickly, but we're going to have links to resources for pretty much all of these. So why don't we start with, so actually before we get started, let me talk about the categories a little bit. So most of us think of accessibility testing as you download a tool, you run it, it's going to go through all your pages, and it's going to give you a score. And that is pretty much the bottom tier that you see here with automated testing. And there's certain things that these tools can't do that you need to actually do yourself as a human. And that's the next level up, which we're talking about manual testing, where you need to use a keyboard, or you need to look at your colors and do visual design review, or you need to use a screen reader. So these are different tools that you would use to be able to do an evaluation. And then finally, up at the top, we've got usability testing. And this is actually where you're doing user testing, but really what you're doing is you're doing user testing with people with disabilities. So instead of testing your website with a piece of software that's a proxy for the experience that this person with a disability would have, you're actually getting a real person to test it for you, to look at it, and to give you feedback. So these are all different levels of testing, and most people quit after like 3 or 4 of these. So let's start off with the easy levels that people start off with. So we're going to describe some low-hanging fruit first, which is stuff that you absolutely should take care of, because these are the issues that will get your company sued. So these are particularly important because they present a legal risk to your organization, and they can cost a lot of money. Then we discussed there's single page testing with some of the tools that you have, and then site-wide testing that you would need to basically have a subscription to a larger platform to be able to manage that for you. So let's look a little bit deeper. So we mentioned Wave for beginners, and we mentioned Axe for developers. So those are the 2 tools primarily that we're using. So the low-hanging fruit, what is actually the low-hanging fruit? It's almost like there's one accessibility lawsuit that has been copied and pasted thousands of times. And we're talking hundreds of times a year by one law firm. And it's kind of like the DNA. Think of it as a virus. The DNA gets replicated in other lawsuits because attorneys don't like spending a lot of time producing documents. So somebody else has done a lawsuit like this, and they can copy and paste that and present an equivalent lawsuit. They'll do that. So if you look at the sort of violations that they cite over and over again, the first one is that you're missing alternative text to your images. So that is one that if you have a lot of images, it can be painstaking to correct. It's something that your content people typically are responsible for, but it's important that you have alternative text or that you declare those images as decorative. The next is having empty links that contain no text. And this happens all over the place with like JavaScript frameworks where you have a button, you'll have something like a search button, or you'll have some sort of functionality at the top of the page that actually is a link, but there's no text to it. It just basically triggers some sort of JavaScript that does something. Well, that doesn't play very nicely with assistive technology. It also is a little bit difficult to handle because not every single tool catches that. The third is redundant links, where you say you have like a card on a layout and you have the photo and you have the headline both linking to the same page. It's annoying. I don't think it's a showstopper for accessibility, but for some reason, this made it into the top 4 issues that are cited in every lawsuit. So one of the things you're going to have to start off with is if you're sued, is telling the judge this is really a non-issue. You could do that, or you could just fix it, which is a whole lot easier. Finally, you have linked images missing alt text. So this would be a button or a call to action that doesn't have alternative text to it. That one truly is a showstopper. So I mentioned that the empty links that contain no text, the only tools that I know of that actually capture this are Wave and CiteSort. So it kind of creates a little bit of a problem, because if I'm trying to calculate the legal risk of these violations for a company, I kind of have to use a different method to follow number 2, or I have to ignore it. But Wave will definitely capture it, and if you're looking for it, you'll see, it works in a left-hand toolbar. It'll show you how many instances of an empty link you have. So you see that right here on the screen. If you're doing page testing, you also have other tools that you can work with. You have the built-in contrast checker that we were talking about in Google DevTools, and we have AxePro, which we're also going to look at in a demo. So broadening this up a little bit in terms of the errors that you see on pages, these really are some of the top errors, like top 9 or 10 errors that you would run. Again, missing alternative text. Form field labels. If you have a form field, like say your first name or your last name in a reply form, if you don't have a label for that, that's works with assistive technology, essentially it would be as if you went to a site, you saw a text field, but you had no idea what you're supposed to enter into it. Is it your social security number, first name, last name, first line of your address? You wouldn't know. So form field labels are crucial to people who use assistive technology. And missing labels are all over the web. It's one of the most common errors that you'll see out there. Insufficient color contrast is another one. And that one you can tell actually in designs before you're actually, you can see insufficient color contrast at the design stage if you're reviewing visual design. So you don't necessarily have to wait until a site is in development to start catching those issues. There is a plugin to Sketch called Stark, which will help you find this. But again, sometimes if you use images and if you use naked text on top of an image, you may run into a little bit of difficulty in terms of being able to determine exactly what your color contrast is. Me personally, unless you have real control over the darkness of the image and real control, absolute control over the positioning of the text on an image, you want to avoid that design pattern entirely and not have naked text on top of a photo or on top of an image. We'll get into tab index, we'll get into focus a little bit later on when I'm doing a demo, but these are like basically the most common mistakes that you'll see on every single site out there. So if there's anything that you should test for, these will probably come up top of the list with your, if you're working with some of the tools that we're talking about tonight. So let's actually get into some of these demos. One of my favorite tools is Wave. Give me just 1 second so I can switch the AV over to this screen. Just a second. I'll just do the whole desktop. It'll be so much easier. Okay. So let me show you. This is LinkedIn. This is LinkedIn again, and this is LinkedIn using the Wave plugin.
Could you stop sharing, Claudia?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. All right.
No worries.
Thanks for letting me know.
Okay.
All right. So this is my LinkedIn feed. Are you seeing it now?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So what you'll see on my LinkedIn feed, this is the regular page. I don't know why this keeps on going blank on me. I do think it's a loose cable, so sorry about that. Am I sharing the screen again or no? Not yet.
No, yeah, reshare.
Okay. All right, let's try this again. Give me a thumbs up if it's working for you now. Okay,
You're good.
excellent, excellent. So this is my LinkedIn page. I like LinkedIn because it has so much content, it has so many different kinds of controls that they're working at it constantly, but you could probably use it for teaching because there's always a real variety of different issues that can pop up. And if we turn on the Wave plugin, which of course is behind my screen sharing interface. Okay, here we go. So I'll take it a second, and it comes up as a sidebar. So Wave by WebAIM is a plugin that you download, you install it in Chrome. I actually think there's other versions for Firefox and Safari, and it runs in a sidebar over here. And it has a few different tabs of what you can work with. So the first thing that you're going to see is you're going to see the summary. And really, if you're developing websites and you're new to accessibility, this is a good tool. And one of the things that you should get in the habit of is as you're developing, try to get yourself to a point where the errors and the alerts are basically zero. So if I go into, and you also see that Wave, it tries to give you icons within the layout. Now, because it gets a little crazy to layer the icons on top of the layout in terms of JavaScript, what the folks at WebAIM decided is that it was probably easier to embed the logos, embed the different icons inside of the layout. So you still get the rough sense of what it is. The layout might be a little bit mangled, but you can click on any one of those issues and it'll tell you what it is. Now, one of the things that it took me a while to find in Wave is this code tab that comes up. If I click on this, it'll actually bring up the DOM, it'll bring up the markup to the page you're in, and it'll actually show you where that error happens. So if I click on any one of these issues, it will actually bring, at the bottom, it'll bring up the part in the DOM where this is at. Axe does the same thing. So, but this is a good feature to have, particularly if you're a developer, if you're writing code and you're trying to debug as you go. If I open up details, it'll list every single instance that we have here. Remember, we were talking about like empty links and buttons with no text. So let's look at some of these buttons with no text. If we look up top, we'll probably see that the first one, yep, right here is actually the search button. So you see a visual link for search. You know that it'll trigger something, but it doesn't have the word search in it. To a sighted person, that's not necessary, but to somebody who is blind or using a screen reader, that might be a showstopper. They might be able to guess that it's a search button because it's, because of the context that it's in, but it's not particularly explicit here. And you start seeing things like different alerts, like somebody using alternative text that, oh, look, the alt says no alternative text description for this image. So it technically has alternative text, but the alternative text is telling you that there is no alternative text. So that's a little bit sketchy. And so you'll find different instances of that happening on the page as well. So Wave is a neat tool because it'll tell you what it is, and then if you click on these information items, it'll give you a little bit more in terms of what the issue is and where it comes from, and it'll give you references and links to the WCAG standard that define what this issue is. So Wave is a really good tool if you're starting out in accessibility and you want to learn and you want to get exposed to this practically. It goes into a significant amount of depth. And I think it's an excellent starting point. So let's go back to our deck. And next we have Axe by DQ Systems. And Axe works inside of your dev tools, as you see in the screenshot. So let's actually look at Axe in action. So let me take the same layout, okay, the same LinkedIn feed. And this time I have Axe installed. So I'll see the little icon there up on the screen that says Axe. Well, it doesn't work like Wave because if I click on it, all I'm going to see is the version and the credits for this. The way I activate it is I inspect an element or I use F12 and it props up DevTools. And DevTools comes up, and if you're like mine, you have a lot of links on here, but you don't see Axe anywhere on the page. Why? Because Sneaky Axe is the very last item on the menu, and you have to basically extend the menu out to the end to pull it up. So that's probably the hardest thing about Axe, is actually finding it. So how does it work? It basically, you click the big old Analyze button, and it'll go through, and it's, as we speak, it's running about 150 tests on the page. Same thing with Wave when we were doing it before. It took it a little bit of time to load because it's running about 150 tests in JavaScript to be able to give us the results. So Axe, I start seeing the results here already. So I start seeing that there are ARIA attributes that are wrong. Of course, color contrast, that comes up all the time. And if you notice, Axe will show me what the source code is in the DOM of where that is. And if I want, it'll also highlight it. So it'll show me where it is on the page. If I click on Inspect Node, it's kind of does the same thing that that we just saw Wave doing. It'll take me to where it is inside of the HTML DOM and show me the element that that's not working. But it also shifted what tab I'm in. It jumped me into the Elements tab. So I have to go back to Axe over here to get back into it. So the other neat thing is, if you see up here to the top right, it shows 1 of 10. There's 10 violations, and I can basically go skipping through the violations as we speak. So 10 violations for contrast color, not great. For a feed the length of LinkedIn, not bad. And then we'll run into issues like, okay, we should be having landmarks on a page. Landmarks are, think of them as subdivisions of a page. And if you're using assistive technology and you don't feel like hearing the entire page, landmarks can work like a table of contents. So imagine somebody gave you a 50-page PDF and you need to navigate that 50-page PDF and there are no chapters or sections to it. Your experience would not be terrific in terms of finding what you want. But if you had nicely labeled chapters and subsections to it, you'd be able to skip around. That is the purpose that landmarks and headings serve to somebody who has who uses a screen reader. So let me go back to Axe and show you. This is Axe regular. They have a beta of what they're calling Axe Pro at DQ, and the beta is free. And it's been free for many months, probably getting close to a year. And I would say take advantage of it while it still is free, because it's an amazingly powerful tool. So let's say I want to save the results here. It's going to, if I were new, it would say like, sign me up for an account with Axe. I'd have to go in, set up an account. I've done that already. So this is like a cooking show where you kind of get to the part where you're pulling everything out of the oven. So I've done it. I've set up an account. It takes me into Axe Beta, and let's save this as a test in Axe Beta. So the cool part is, okay, it gives me these nice little graphical interfaces, but this is the bomb right here. These guided tests, which are probably the perfect segue to go into manual testing, but we're not going to do that yet. It'll show you how to do keyboard tests, so it finds operability issues. It'll find where, for instance, your button and links, are they right? Or images, which images aren't labeled right, which images are missing alt text. You can get into all that stuff, but you can basically run a separate test through this where it'll guide you through a manual test to detect issues that Axe on its own as an automated bot can't catch. So this kind of takes your Axe testing up to another whole level or another whole standard of what you can do. The keyboard test is amazing because if I were testing, for instance, the site for my cruise company, a blind person may jump using keyboard to go from one actionable item to the next. So basically you're jumping from link to link. Well, it just so happens on a page of this kind of complexity, or the sort of complexity that you would have on the home page for a cruise company, you have 150 links. So you wouldn't realize that you have 150 links unless you were going through the Axe tool that actually counts them for you and starts telling you where the issues are. And a lot of times those links are hidden, or you just don't see them, or you miss them doing your own testing. Axe as a bot will definitely help you pick up all of those sort of links and issues that you may have missed otherwise. So you can go through this item by item, but we'll come back to this and start showing you how manual testing works. But Axe is an excellent tool for developers. Now, the ideal place to do this in your software development lifecycle, the ideal time to use Axe is when you're doing front-end coding. So using tools like this, really there should be no excuse for you having any sort of accessibility issues that are detectable making their way into production. Now, if you use Axe as you're developing and you're running it constantly as like unit testing, or you're doing page testing before you commit your stuff to development, that's when it has the most impact, because then you're catching stuff, it's almost like running spell check after every edit that you make, or running a linter. I've seen some developers use Axe where it's open source. You can get it to work with Node. You can get it to work with a browser refresh, so that basically every time you hit save with your code, Axe is running and you're seeing your error count go down and down and down and down with every save that you do on your code. So the idea is use this early, shift left, as DQ likes to say, and make your corrections before you commit your code to your repository. And that way you don't have to get into version control issues or have to undo a lot of the stuff. The earlier you catch these accessibility issues, the less costly and the less difficult they are to remediate. So let me show you another one of my favorite tools. So am I sharing PowerPoint with you now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. So this is Site Improve. Now, Site Improve, you can use it as well, just like we used Wave. there is a site improve extension right here, and it'll basically run 150 tests on my page and give me all the results here at the accessibility checker. This part of site improve is free, and it's pretty good. And I would say it's comparable to Axe. Axe is a lot more configurable. The other thing with Axe is because it's in DevTools, you can copy and paste from DevTools into Jira or something to write a job ticket. Site improve, haven't had so much luck with that. Wave is a definite no. You cannot copy and paste from Wave into a ticketing system. And that's, that's an important feature, especially if you don't like rewriting everything to put in a bug report or an error ticket. So, site improve. That's one way of using it. Another way of using site improve is you set up an account. It's not cheap, but this is enterprise level software, and it will run scans of your site. Now, the stuff that I do at Royal Caribbean, we let site improve run at one point where we didn't set limits on the pages that it ran, and it came back to us with about 138,000 pages. So you run site improve, it'll scan those 138,000 pages every 5 days for you and return aggregated data on that. If you use a tag with site improve, it'll also tell you what the page views are for each page that you're scanning. And so what you can do with site improve is you can mix that sort of page view data with your issues. And once you start mixing those two, then you can start actually thinking about this. Each issue is like a pollutant, and you can tell what your emissions are. So going back to those 4 issues that we had at the beginning, we were talking about like the ones that come up in every single lawsuit. If you knew how many times you're putting out those issues on the internet, well, then you could start calculating your legal risk. You could start telling how much of an offender or how much of a polluter my website is, and from that kind of derive, is my legal risk increasing or is it decreasing? What do I need to do? What do I need to triage in order to get my legal risk down as low as I possibly can? So site improve doesn't just test one site with your account, it tests as many as you want it to. So I have it running, for instance, at Royal on 25 different websites. So in this case, they're kind enough to give us a demo site. And the demo site, they have different aspects to the application. Some of them are around quality control and SEO. And then there's accessibility. So tonight, we're only really going to be looking at the accessibility part of the application. So the other thing that they don't have in this demo is that I'll take a site and I'll split it up into different slices based on URL patterns so I can start getting really granular with my data. So in this case, they don't have groups, but I'll set up page groups, for instance, for destinations, or another one for ships, or another one for staterooms, and start seeing how the different parts of the site are performing, because typically those are handled by different product teams. So if your divisions of your site match the product teams that are working for you, it's kind of like you can start tracking the different teams' performance as you go. So in this case, they have, this demo site is coming up with 124 pages, but let's look at this. So it's given us a crawl, and if we click on Improve Score, it'll list all the changes you can make and how much it's going to boost the score by. Now, these boosts are pretty small because this site has the unnaturally high score of 92.1. This little pearl, this little nugget that's sitting here on the gauge, that little nugget is actually what they've determined to be the industry average for your particular vertical. And it'll show you what that accessibility score, what your score is over time in this tiny little graph. And this nugget is basically the industry benchmark that you're doing against. So you've got this nice bright green color because you are kicking ass against that benchmark. You got a pretty ugly red color if you were lagging below in the 50s or the 60s. And if you're new to Site Improve, and if you're new to accessibility testing, that's probably where you're going to start out at. So it gives you a whole lot of depth in terms of what you can look at. It tracks the issues that you've had. So it'll look historically at what issues you've had before, and it'll give you credit for all the issues that you've fixed over the history of it tracking. So in this case, there's 33 issues that it's tracked. I can export anything that I see that has an export button. I can export to Excel, download it, use it in a nice little data visualization program, or, which is what I do, Site Improve has an API, and I use data visualization tools like Power BI to pull the data down through the API and then start creating dashboards and that stuff for it. Because as nice as this is, the graphs in Site Improve, you have to kind of go pogo sticking in and out of every single issue to get and see how those things are tracking over time. And if I want to set up my own metrics and I want to set up my own KPIs, there's no way with any of these site-wide crawling tools that I could get it to do that for me. So I prefer to set up my own KPIs, plan all this stuff in advance, download the data, and then start working with it with my own data visualization tool. But that's some pretty powerful stuff, and it takes some serious skill to be able to pull that off. So very few companies are actually doing that right now. But other sort of aspects to it, we looked at the overview. It'll give you a summary. In this case, it'll give you a summary of the different sites. There's only one right here. It gives you a summary of the different groups. So for a typical site that I'll be looking at, I may have like as many as 20 different groups for a major site. For a smaller site, about 5 or 6. Groups are important because if you don't do groups, all you're going to be seeing is aggregate data for your entire site. If you can actually get your groups to a point where you're dicing and slicing and seeing where in the site errors are happening, you can be much more effective in fixing stuff. So I think I'm going to leave it at that for Site Improve right now. Jonathan, are there any questions in chat or anything that somebody wants to bring up before I start moving on to manual testing?
Yeah, Shrirupa, and sorry if I jacked that up, but asked what was the name of the data visualization tool that you just mentioned?
Okay, so what I'm using is Power BI, but I haven't shown Power BI here. And Tableau is another excellent tool that you could work with as well. So I use I use Power BI because my company has an Office 365 license, and so like if you have Office 365 in a major workplace, Power BI is going to be one of those extra Office apps that you're going to, you kind of go into Office Online and you're going to discover it, and whoa, you have a license for this. If you're not in a major corporation, Power BI works. It's on the PC only, but you can't share it without having a paid license. So you could run all the analysis you want. You can create the dashboard, but if you want to share it with your client, you need to purchase a license for Power BI somehow. But if you're working with a major corporation that has Office 365, which is probably every single one of them, then you'll probably find that they have a license that'll let you use Power BI. And there's a bit of a learning curve to it. If you can get into those dashboard in a day training sessions, there are a few vendors that'll do it for Microsoft. They're free and they're absolutely outstanding, but it's a full day. It's going to be a full day training session and your head's going to be like this. But once you go through this, you're going to have some serious data visualization mojo there. The other tool is Tableau. I'm not as familiar with Tableau, so I understand that it's a lot more powerful and a lot more elegant, but Power BI is the tool I use for now. Any other
And
questions?
yeah, Marcelo asked, does Chrome Dev have an accessibility tree panel?
It does, and I don't use it a lot. You know, I basically stick to dev tools, basically because my role typically is not so much seeing how screen readers are interpreting the DOM in general. My role is more isolating issues and writing tickets, and the combination is great because for me, I can look in Chrome DevTools and figure out what the development team is naming an object, and then I can write my job ticket so that I'm using the same terminology and same nomenclature that the product team is using. But truth be told, I don't use the accessibility tree that much. I'm not going to say it's not valuable. It's just not a pattern that I use. Any other questions before we dive in here?
No, go ahead and move forward.
Okay, excellent. So we're going to do a little bit of keyboard testing on the fly. So we're going to look at different kinds of manual testing that you can do. One is keyboard testing, one is focused visibility. I don't have a demo lined up for doing visual design review, but anybody who's worked with Sketch or who's used Stark to be able to determine color contrast should be able to tell what those issues are. And then screen reader testing, I'm not set up to do that here because I'm using a Mac tonight. The workflow that I typically do with screen reader testing is I'll work on a Windows machine, I'll have NVDA running, I'll have the computer muted, and I'll be running NVDA's speech viewer muted. So it'll list in text how things are getting read by the screen reader, but I don't have to listen to the robotic voice sped up or slowed down. I can scan that visually. And I find like that is a good workflow for myself, particularly if I'm trying to see the context of how a page works for somebody who uses a screen reader. Because you get into these really complicated pages like LinkedIn, and they just go on forever. And so you want to be able to see, is somebody coming into your page going to be able to see the big picture and understand how all the pieces fit together? Or is it going to be like going through a dark mansion with a flashlight and only seeing a little tiny piece at a time and not being able to get the gestalt of the whole thing? So those are different types of testing that I do. But let me tonight, focus on keyboard testing and show you how focus visibility works. So let me jump back to Chrome. And I found a really good example with Amazon here. So this is like any product page in Amazon. And as you know, these pages go on, and they go on, and they go on, and they go on, and they go on. Okay. So imagine if your mouse was broken, or you don't have the motor skills, you don't have, you have MS or something like that, and or Parkinson's, and you can't work a pointing device. So, the scenario is more common than you think. So I'm hitting Command up arrow. Wait, let me put focus on this, and that'll take me up to the top of the page. Command bottom arrow will take me up and down the page. So there's different sorts of commands that you in that situation would learn. Like for instance, function down arrow takes me one screen at a time. So this is how I can work through the whole screen if I'm sighted. But how do I put focus on these elements and links to click on them? So if I use the tab key, I'm going to cheat, okay, because we've jumped up and down. I'm going to put focus up here at the very top, or actually up here on Blender. So if I hit Shift Tab, it takes me backwards. And you guys see that yellow background, that yellow ring that is around the elements. So that means that the element has focus. It means that that element is waiting for input or some sort of action on my part. So if I hit Now this is for instance a hamburger menu. If I hit enter, it opens that up. If I hit, and this kind of gets a little bit touchy, like how do you navigate one of those? I'm using the tab key to take me from one link to the next. So I can, oh look, I'm on Fire TV, let's expand that. I use the enter key and it pushed that to the side. And now I can go through this and I can actually go to different elements. I can go back to the main menu. I'm hitting Shift Tab to go backwards. Hit enter. Hello, Claudio. And that's not where I wanted to go. a little surprise there. So let's go back into Blender because I'm in a Blender kind of mood. And if I click forward, you see it actually takes me to that search button. There's a problem with that search button because my focus color and the color of that button are virtually the same. So if I didn't actually see that change states, I would not know that that focus button, that focuses on the search button. But if I watched it change, as I am now, I could tell. So my personal opinion is that the focus state should be the first thing that you see on the page, because if you're tabbing around and you get distracted or you look at something else, you want to know what element on the page is actionable without having to go backwards and forwards. So to me, your focus styles should scream at you even more than your calls to action, even more than your action buttons. So in this case, I would probably do some sort of design token for every time it's yellow, because yellow is your main button color. And every time you have yellow, the focus state would be something else like blue or green. So that's one approach to it. We run into the same problem with Royal Caribbean because all of the action buttons are bright blue in a color that's almost identical to the blue focus ring that you have by default in most browsers. So, oops, that's not what I wanted. Let's go back to Chrome. Okay. So as I tab through this, oh, wait, what happened there? It shows me where the focus is. Now, I would expect that the next thing I click on would be returns and orders, but no, it takes me to some sign in that I can't see. So this is a bug right here. If you click on focus and the focus disappears, you don't know what's going to happen if you hit the enter key. You should, what you're striving for when you're doing this kind of testing and you're documenting this is full 100% continuity of focus. You don't want it running off the page. You don't want it going to a hidden element. You don't want it being so subtle that you don't know where it's going. So it went someplace, we don't know where it is. Oh, but look, it came back with returns and orders, and I can keep going down the page. So it's a lot of links. This is getting a little tedious. Okay. Okay, it jumped to English after going through that menu, which is kind of a bad thing because it jumped out of the logical order. So that's another thing that you want to test for. You want to make sure that elements are in the correct order that in the DOM, and you want to make sure that when you tab through them, it's in a logical order, because otherwise people are just going to get lost. Okay, so now we've switched out of the menu and now we have your traditional blue border. A focus state is a CSS pseudo class. You can basically make a focus state do anything you want. You can even give it transitions. You can make it bounce. You can make it fade. You can make it do all kinds of things. It is a CSS property, or actually it's a pseudo class, and you can assign it all kinds of properties that you want. You can tack it onto any selector you want. So you don't have to go with this blue border, but that's kind of the default, and that's what people expect. So you can make the border prettier, you can make it not fuzzy like this, but you can use your imagination on this. And as you can see, I'm going through this, and actually I did not expect it to do this. I expected from results to go into the main column and not into the right-hand column. So I'm going through all these things in the right-hand column, and now I don't know where it went. And I'm hitting, there we go. We went back to the main column. So what happened here? probably the right-hand column with all the add to cart and buy now stuff probably came up in the DOM before the actual content information. But yeah, let's, I'm hitting the tab and I am going tab by tab by tab by tab by tab by tab by tab. Okay, now if I'm down here and I'm like, oh, what product was I looking at anyway? I have to tab backwards one by one through all of these different links. So this is why landmarks are important, particularly for somebody who's using a screen reader. And screen readers do work a lot like this sort of keyboard accessibility. In this case, actually, I think a blind person with a screen reader would have an advantage over a sighted person who has to use a keyboard only. But see, it's taking me through this item by item by item by item. So you guys get the idea with keyboard testing. Now, one of the things that you want to look for in keyboard testing, I don't think I can find this for you, is carousels are a big problem. Okay, we got to the carousel and it jumped from the left link all the way at the bottom left to the right link all the way at the bottom right. I hit enter. Most carousels don't let you access those buttons by default. So people have to go through a lot of extra work to make sure that you can access those. But, okay, how do I get to the actual elements in that carousel? Because I can go backwards through the carousel, I can go forwards to the carousel, but I can't play any of these videos with a keyboard. So I would need to use the mouse, which I can't use, to be able to access those different videos. So that's something to be aware of. Another thing to be aware of is particularly sites that don't have scroll bars. I'm hitting the down arrow and it's taking me a little chunk at a time. I apologize if anyone's getting motion sickness looking at this, but I'm basically hitting the up and down arrow to be able to look at this. So I'll find lots of keyboard accessibility issues. Like if you have like terms and conditions in a contract and you have them inside those little frames and you have to be able to scroll up and down, 9 times out of 10, that design pattern will give you all kinds of issues with keyboard accessibilities. Modals are a giant issue. You get a pop-up. A lot of times the focus stays on the page underneath the pop-up. So you can't even get to what's on that pop-up to be able to modify that content. Or once you get in there, then you're stuck. You can't get out of it. You can't hit a control button. You can't hit escape. You basically have the modal. The only thing that you can do is refresh the entire page to do what you're doing. So if you have like an e-com site or something and you get a pop-up that comes up, that pop-up could be a problem. We use WebEx at work for a lot of our video meetings. WebEx is full of keyboard traps. So if you're trying to get into a meeting and it asks you what your audio and video preferences are, chances are that's as far as you're going to get without trying something a little bit more drastic or just having to call in on plain old telephone. So keyboard traps are a really important issue. There's reverse keyboard traps where you have a modal that pops up and then you move on to something else, but the modal doesn't disappear. It just stays there like a guest that doesn't leave. So those are things that'll happen a lot of times because the developers who built them use events that are like mouse over, mouse off, click, and they're not really using inclusive events like focus and blur. So you have to be attentive to what events you're using when you're coding to make things pop up and to make things disappear. So, any questions?
I got a question here, and I'm going to try to state this because I feel like there's some missing words here to make it sound right. But does focus color with inefficient contrast count as a violation? And I'm assuming focus color meaning like color for calls to action, buttons, things like that. Is that where you?
No, it's like when you tab,
Right.
and the focus color that you sometimes you have blue on blue, so you can really see the focus.
Okay, so The real answer is it's crazy subjective. Remember, this is a manual test, right? I am running it myself, and if I'm good, I'm running it with a scorecard. Let me show you what one of these scorecards might look like. There we go. Where all the different tests, and I rank it pass fail if I run into a violation. Well, if I had a rip-roaring argument with one of my kids and somebody cut me off in traffic and I'm having a shit day and then I'm having to test this, it's going to be way more subjective and there are going to be way more fails on this than if I'm having a good day and it's Friday afternoon after a couple of beers. So is it a violation? Marcelo, my answer would be, it depends. Am I in a good mood or in my crappy mood? You know, what am I trying to prove? So I may do something like I'll flag it as a potential issue and I may downplay the severity of it because, you know, it's kind of subjective. I mean, the severity scale that I use in the scorecard, let me jump to this part, is if there's no workaround to it, like somebody is stuck and they can't work with this, then it's critical. But if it doesn't have enough contrast, well, okay, maybe the workaround is playing with contrast mode, or maybe your experience is degraded, so it's kind of a medium level issue, but I wouldn't necessarily give it a severity of 4 for poor contrast. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll put together a list of issues. Do I have samples? Yep, like this one. So you list the issue on the left, you list the severity in another column, you have a recommendation, you say where it is. I might have other columns like what's the URL, is this needed to achieve our level of WCAG compliance? And the dev team will, or the PM will take these, it'll filter the list, they'll sort it the way they want, and they will basically be able to prioritize the issues in the queue based on the stuff that I give them. So it'll probably be a lower priority issue than something like a keyboard trap, which is an absolute showstopper, or you know, or basically where the focus is non-existent. So things to look at. Let me just kind of recap this a little bit. Keyboard accessibility. Can you access everything on the page? So with a tab, you're not accessing the text, you're accessing every link, every actionable item. So just, you know, don't get spooked if you're tabbing around and you just jump through 6 paragraphs of text, because that's not how tabbing works. With a screen reader, you would read it by like using the down arrow, but you know, tabbing will get you to every actionable element. Then once you tab to it, can you operate those elements? So there is this long way ARIA specification that'll tell you how every single component is supposed to behave, which arrow keys you're supposed to use, which tab, you know, when to use the enter, when to use a space bar. That sort of operability, you do kind of need to learn to be able to understand what's a fault and when is something not working as it's supposed to. But if you look at the WAI ARIA specs, there's a best practices document there. It'll specify component by component what the expected behavior is supposed to be. All right, so we mentioned keyboard traps, focus styles. Can you see what his focus all the time? And excuse my French, but one of the things that makes me batshit crazy is when designers decide that the focus styles are not pretty enough, and then they suppress them across the entire site. And you'll see something in CSS that says outline none. And you'll see it incredibly high, like as a reset on the entire CSS for your entire website. Those people need to be taken out and shot. Or they need to be basically be forced to use their own websites with their hands tied behind their back and with a little stick that they can just hit the tab key. And then they will learn that you do not suppress focus styles site-wide. So, sorry, now I can get off that soapbox.
So it is a violation.
Just so you know,
So
I feel like this
Claudia's violation.
Oh yeah, no. Outline none, and you would see this on more WordPress themes than you know. Oh my gosh. So that's one of the first things you need to get rid of.
So this is why I had to ask that question, Claudio. Yeah, I had to ask that question because I see this in design systems. We have different states for button, but we never think about the outline color of each focus element, right?
And
So I think
yes,
this is important to touch
yes,
because you will see a lot of layouts with a light background, dark background. You need to think through that and swap the outline color as well when you go through. That's why I asked that question.
yes, 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 100%. Building a design system without thinking of your focus styles is like, it's like selling somebody a car with no reverse. You know, it's like it's a crucial piece of functionality that if you forget it, it's like you're really not doing your job. I thought you were going to tell me that last week you published a design system and you had outline none in all of that. I thought you were coming clean on this. So so yeah, you don't want to suppress focus, and you want to think about it. And the other thing, and this is kind of like where we're going to be probably 3 to 5 years from now, is where the focus style is going to be thought of like, here's a chance to do something of beauty. This is where your eye should go. So if you start thinking of motion design and doing things that delight, you know, like this is where you want to be using your micro animations. You know, this is where you want to be drawing your reptile brain to put its attention on something. And so I would be like encouraging people like, okay, if you want to animate your focus rings or you want to do something with it, more power to you. Or if you want it to wait 10 seconds and then do a little throb or something, you know, that's the sort of stuff that you should be doing because that's where your attention needs to go. So yeah, I have some, there's a blog post coming up sometime about that. So, oh, we forgot to mention resize and zoom. Let me, I've got 3 computers here and I keep on using the wrong keyboard for this, so I apologize. So if we go back to LinkedIn, real important, every site needs to be able to zoom up to 200% without having collisions. This is a WCAG standard. Your automated tools can't do this and they can't look at this, but here we have a little bit of an issue. Like this is not truly responsive because this column gets partially hidden. And I have friends over at the Lighthouse of Broward who are low vision, and this makes them mental. Multi-column layouts make them mental. So just like, you know, we all learned with the responsive web a few years ago to like, you have a narrower browser port, viewport, and you make everything fall into a single column, the same should be happening with Zoom. So it's kind of like, you know, shame on LinkedIn for doing this. But you're looking, really what you're looking for more egregiously is text that's cut off. You're looking for stuff that overlaps, that shingles, that covers something else. So those are sorts of issues that you're going to want to look for with Zoom testing. It also doesn't hurt to have a higher standard where just see what happens when you zoom up to 500%. Or maybe make your internal standard 250% so that you're safe. So as long as you're not creating a whole slew of extra work for your product teams, but really 250%, if you've built and you've designed well for responsive, it's gonna happen. It's gonna work in these sorts of instances. So resizing and zoom. I showed you a little bit of the score. So I've created this scorecard where basically you go through pass, fail, not accessible. Google Sheets did something really weird because I used to be able to have a blank field for this, and you know where it was blank, pass, fail, not available. I don't have that anymore. But what it does is it calculates. I have a weighted average in this, has a couple math columns in here, and the math columns will give me whatever the severity is here, times whether it's pass or fail, and then it'll give me a score, and then it'll divide it against what the potential score is. So the beauty of doing something along those lines is that I can actually weight what the severity is of the issues, and then I can take those and I can bring it over to this overview page, and I can show, you know, compare, you know, which ones are the trouble with a, you know, on a graph. Of course, the graph isn't worth much because if I did one on a shit day and I did one on a really nice day, you know, that is also going to affect what the scores are for the different pages. Keep on going to the wrong keyboard.
Is there a weighted average for that, Claudia?
Yeah, if my life were just like boring and vanilla, and if I had the same day every single day, I think that would work beautifully. But really, the point I'm making is that it's crazy subjective. And so anytime you do manual testing, you have to assume a couple things. You know, one, you're subjective. Your frame of mind is going to affect how severe you're going to perceive stuff. And two, you can't find every instance of a violation the way a bot can. You can't be that thorough. You're human. So what I've done in the scorecards that I use is essentially I don't assume that I'm going to find every instance. If I find one instance, I'll fail the page. And I'll keep on failing the page until we start finding those issues. But this sort of method that I have, you know, with the scorecard and then keeping tab of the issues in a different worksheet works incredibly well with product teams. And to give them the control over prioritizing what sort of stuff they put at the top of the stack is also really huge. You know, it lets them work at their own pace and do stuff in their own order. The other thing is a lot of times these will get repetitive. It makes them feel so good if they can take 6 of those items and kill them with one single bug fix. So there's more value to this than you could believe with this ugly little interface, you know, that I've built in Google Sheets. So
Claudio, Kristen is asking if you're going to make the scorecard available as a template.
It's on, I believe it's on the links at the end of the, it is publicly available, so you can find it, you can download it. You don't have edit rights to it, but you can download it, make a copy, and work with it. And there's a README with a little bit of instructions, but the one thing that's kind of tricky about this is that these names that you have here under page need to match these the names of the tabs, and they cannot have spaces in them. So if I name this, if I mess with the name here, let me put a space in here, and then I go back to overview, then it's, you know, at some point or another, it's going to give me a reference issue. Oh, the other thing that's kind of maddening is it doesn't refresh itself all the time. And this could be also one of those little quirks where Google Sheets works better than Excel. So I've used this in Excel, and I use this internally in Excel, and, you know, I'll move this around. So Google Sheets is really, this is the version that I have for the community. The other thing that's really helpful is in your overview is having all of this sort of metadata, who the tester is, what date it was, what version of the product it is, what version of a browser you're using, what OS, you know, what device. This is all really important data for whoever's receiving this on the other end. And if you change devices, it's good to have a different a different sheet. So this is oftentimes for me is with like the deliverable that I'll give for like a manual mini audit. So I'll have this part, which is the facts, and then I'll have a Word doc attached to it that kind of describes, you know, the sort of findings and stuff that I had. So that's how I'll work this. Okay, checking contrast. So let me see, can I escape full screen mode and show you the contrast picker? So this is what we have up above right here. And if I click on this and it loads green in there. So green on gray fails me, and it gives me a contrast ratio of 1.45. Green on white, it's a little bit better, but it still doesn't pass. You know, it gives me 1.94. But if I've got green with black or dark gray text on it, now we're cooking with oil. It gives us a ratio of 6.11. Or I flip it around so that it matches, I flip those two colors so it matches what I'm looking at right here. The beauty of this is I can get super, super, you know, anal with like, okay, you see that, you see the drop shadow? I can see what the contrast is right there at the drop shadow. So I can, especially if you're putting text on top of images, you can find what your worst case scenario is and then do that. And then you have a contrast ratio that you can fail somebody on. Not that that's a desired objective, but it's like you can basically make a stronger case. If you were using DevTools, it would essentially just be looking at the ratio between the colors as they're specified in the DOM. But this gives you the actual colors that are on the screen at a given moment. So I love this tool for that particular purpose. And it's also a lot less tedious to operate than having to find a hex code and put it in like you do with the online website, or it's less tedious than trying to navigate to a certain part of the DOM. So here you're just pointing from one element to the next.
And it works with Figma, Sketch, Adobe XD, all the tools at once.
Yes, it works with anything. So if you're running, if you're running an application, you can see what's happening inside of a live application. If you can put up and keep up like a dialog box or a menu or something, you can also sample that. So it's pretty outstanding. Or you could take a snapshot of something, a screen grab, and then start sampling the screen grab. So it's a tool that I like because it has a lot of potential to it. So here we have the Webby Awards. And the Webby Awards, which is the ooh la la of design on the web, the best of the best, fails miserably with its contrast ratio. And if you start looking down here at links, okay, the links don't work. And actually, you don't know that they're actionable elements because they don't have underlines or carets or anything that lets you know that they're link elements. So one of the things that would, the creatives will go through hoops to win awards in competitions. Sadly, the competitions do not consider accessibility, and there is no competition for accessibility. So until that day happens, people aren't going to strive for real true excellence when it comes to accessibility or with providing truly excellent user experiences for people with disabilities. So this is an issue to consider, and I'm bringing this up because I'm going to wrap up in a little bit. Let me get to a little bit further here and talk about usability testing. The awards are really what goes beyond usability testing. So everything that we've talked about so far is code compliance. Most people quit after you've done the automated testing. You're more diligent if you do the manual testing. If you do incredibly well with your automated testing, that is no guarantee that your manual testing is going to do well. As a matter of fact, I had a team a few months ago that presented me a development site that was axe clean with 0 errors, and then I went and did manual testing, and it was chock full of all sorts of accessibility issues. So these are two different types of testing. They find totally different types of errors. And the accessibility community will tell you that with automated testing, you only find maybe about 30% of the errors that are out there. So usability testing, I've set up a program with the Lighthouse of Broward. And the Lighthouse of Broward, basically, in the program, it was designed so that any company could come to them and they would be able to do accessibility testing for the company and be able to provide feedback. So we've gotten them organized to do that. It's hit some snags with my own company's legal department, but I would encourage any of you to reach out to them. And if you have a site and you want a blind person to give you an opinion on whether that's workable or not, they're a very affordable resource. And so this is what I kind of listed as dial a friend sort of testing. So this is number 8. Next, we have Fable Tech Labs. And this company fills a niche that is incredibly important, where they'll basically put together a panel of people with disabilities to evaluate your software or evaluate your application. Now, why is this all the way up at level 9? because you don't want to go through the expense or the trouble of lining up human testers to give them something that's chock full of errors that you could have already fixed already. So you don't want to like set this all up and have a 3-minute test and they'll tell you, oh, there's stuff broken on it. You want to provide them something that's as clean as possible to the point that they're providing you valuable insight that you're paying them for. So FableTech, they put together panels of people with various different disabilities, and they'll tell you how usable your product is, how many people can complete certain critical tasks. And so I personally think it's the best legal defense. If a blind person tells me they can't use an app on one of our ships, but Fable can tell me, hey, we had 10 blind people test it and all 10 of them were able to use this, then I think that's a stronger defense than saying, oh, well, I tested it with this bot and it should work. So there's a strong argument for doing, testing with humans. Yeah, like what a concept. And the Mac Daddy of all sorts of reviews and the final exam, that's the way I present it to our teams, is to have a formal audit. So you're going to get some people that are lifetime users of assistive technology that have 15 or 20 years experience in accessibility, and they're going to review your application for the low price of about $200 an hour. And so if you have 20 pages for them to review, you're probably talking about $25,000 to have an audit. But these audits are gold. They go in phenomenal detail. They'll tell you what is wrong with your site. They'll go into fixing it prescriptively. And you're going to get a lot of insight that you wouldn't get from other earlier stages of testing. So this is really the final push to make sure that you haven't missed anything. So because it's so costly and because it's so in-depth, I would strongly recommend to doing this pre-launch, when your site is in staging or in testing, to make sure that the user experience makes sense and to make sure that you've captured everything. So some of you may have seen this before, and this is my way of looking at accessibility in terms of hierarchy of issues. So perceivable, the bottom rung, that rung really is anything that you can catch with automated testing. If you're looking at operability, well, operability was one of the things that we're looking at with manual testing. So that's the next rung up in this hierarchy of accessibility. Is it understandable? Well, that's usability testing with people with disabilities. So most of the times people quit before they get up to that level of making something usable. So for us who are fully abled, we'll typically think like, well, is it not just usable? Is it a good user experience? Does it have great UX? Is this excellent? This is the sort of stuff that wins awards. But because we don't have awards in accessibility, people don't strive for this. So really where we are from a state of digital equality is that, a major brand will shoot for an experience that's up here that, you would grade as an A-. But really, when it comes to developing something for people with disabilities, and they say, hey, does it meet WCAG standards? Is it compliant? Well, it's like you have an F quality product and you're aspiring to a D. So, the quality isn't there. We're going to get there. But really, I mean, if you're thinking about testing for accessibility and developing a good user experience that works for everybody, you really need to think beyond compliance, and you really need to think of those higher tiers of your digital experience. If you don't, then really you're actually discriminating against people who have a disability. So that's something to keep in mind. So thank you all very much for having gone through all of this testing, all of these demos with me. I have at the very end of this deck a list of resources. I'm going to try to post this up on SlideShare tonight, if not tomorrow morning, so that you guys can get to this. And all of these are links to this. But really, the first 5 of these, I posted them on Meetup today, so that you guys could download the tools or take a look at some of the stuff before, before our presentation today. So, Jonathan, do we have any questions or any remarks? Or if anybody wants to unmute themselves and cut in, that's fine too.
Yeah, no questions in the chat right now.
Well, I'll just take an opportunity here. So first off, thank you, Claudia, as always. You know, put a very detailed presentation. I think it kind of really sums up all the work that we have been kind of leading up to. There's a couple of things I do want to take advantage, and I think it may be an unfair advantage, the fact that we have you and Marcelo. So I feel like have both spectrums of the of the equation here between both the accessibility, and I think that graph that you showed where I think everything is associated in terms of like the able pyramid and then the one that is for disabled. I'm just curious if there's any patterns as it relates to design or best practices that you've seen, Marcelo, and kind of get both of your takes of how do you draw that line, right, between something looking and performing well, and then also being it accessible and compliant with all the other areas. And I'm just curious, maybe hear from both of you, like, how do you see that kind of in this aspect of making something that is functional, that gets people to where they need to. But as you know, especially when it comes down to CSS, and if there's any designers out there that have tried to, kind of make that thing move just the way that you want it, or you want to have the right experience, which oftentimes does lead into, doing certain types of customizations that perhaps hinder the ability for people to find it. So I'm just curious from you guys' standpoint, like, how do we reach that happy medium, or is there a happy medium to begin with?
Want to start, Claudia?
I don't think of it as a medium.
I can think of 5 things to say about that.
I know.
if you're a good designer, you're designing for usability, and you're not putting looks as at the top of your scale necessarily. And so if you're really designing for usability and then you're designing visually and making something attractive, if that's the approach you're doing, any designer worth their salt could make just about anything accessible. It's just a matter of being diligent and paying attention to this. So this whole notion of there being a trade-off between aesthetics and accessibility, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It really is an attention to usability. So Marcel, I'll let you go.
With that, Marcelo, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna say. Like, you have to think of the design industry maturity level. We are finally reaching a very sensible level, right? And like with the whole empathy wave, the past 7 to 10 years, we are now starting to create design principles, design tenets with accessibility in mind, right? So I think before we had aesthetic in mind, and then we evolved to usability in mind, and now we're just going higher with accessibility in mind, with the inclusivity in mind. So one challenge that I'm sure Claudia will have, I can talk 2 hours on the challenge that he faced, is regarding stakeholders and product managers trying to prioritize, accessibility best practices lower than the aesthetics. So I think we don't need, as designers, we don't need to surface the accessibility challenge. We need to counter into the design process, into the design best practices. And that will go through talking to a developer, partnering with them, speaking a common language, and what is an outline, and what is focus, what are the states. So I think that the more you talk and you are trained in accessibility, you create like this cycle of a dialogue for a better experience.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because my interactions with developers, I don't get that much pushback. The pushback happens when you built something, you built it wrong, and somebody tells you got to rebuild it. Like, that is just a world of suck, and it's incredibly costly at that point. And unfortunately, most people, when you come into accessibility, it's after you've built something and you've been sued and you have to totally take everything down and start from scratch, which is the most painful and costly way to do it. If you shift left, as DQ says, and you start, you know, you start involving accessibility at the beginning of the software development cycle, then it's the least expensive. If you get people to check their work, you know, like with a linter, or check your work for you know, with Axe as you're building it, then there's nothing to fix later on, and the cost is so much less. And getting developers to buy into that is not hard, not at all. It's just more like, well, here's a whole area of quality that you didn't realize. And then now that we're working with like rapid release cycles and continuous improvement, it's like, okay, well, you don't get it in this sprint, there's another sprint coming up, you know, where you're going to be able to address this. So the challenge oftentimes is actually with management to let the developers spend the time, to give them the resources to do what they feel is right.
Got it. And so, in your opinion, Claudia, like, or for anyone else that's on the call that maybe have had those sort of issues, or are looking to get into accessibility, but you realize that you don't know how to program, or you don't know how to do a lot of the QA and CSS, which I think a lot of it depends on kind of what line of design or where do you come from, right? Typically, when you have a lot of people, especially common in boot camps, right, where you have people either come from a marketing background or perhaps a more graphic design background. Like, how do you basically start getting into this whole area of accessibility, not only to enhance the type of skill sets that you may have, but to really become that advocate, right, from a marketing standpoint? You want to be a better designer, you want to create better experiences, but sometimes I feel like that there's just so much to actually take on, especially for those who perhaps don't have a technical background. What would be a good point to start, in your opinion, and you know, maybe you can kind of share your thoughts with the community, or if there's anyone else on this call that, you know, has had similar issues, you know, we'd love to kind of get your take on.
Kristen.
I think we have here Kristen.
Yeah, okay, so this is the nice debate of should designers code, and I don't want to bring that thing up again. I know, it's a rabbit hole, but I do have front-end development skills. I'm self-taught. I had to do it the hard way because I was on a very small team of one, and I had to just do it. And I'm really grateful for it. And I don't want to be a coder, but I feel like having that fundamental knowledge of semantic HTML and CSS best practices informs me. So when I am working with front-end developers, I can speak their language and I can understand the need for accessibility. So it's not a practice I want to keep continuing in the future, but I do feel the need to keep educating myself on like modern coding methods in order to be able to communicate with developers and understanding accessibility best practices.
So yeah, it does help to speak the language, and it really does so help to be like I thought being a full stack designer was multidisciplinary enough. Accessibility takes it up to another whole level. So it's a fun thing to aspire to and get into, like, you know, later in your career, like I did. But places to get started, I would be like, Wave is an excellent place to get started because it takes a lot. It's not intimidating, and you can start seeing where it works on the page, and you can explore it, and you know it's very friendly that way. So Wave is a good starting point if you want to dive in and just start playing with tools. LinkedIn Learning, a colleague of mine, Derek Featherstone, has an absolutely excellent accessibility course that's on LinkedIn Learning. So if you have a subscription to that, I would highly recommend his video course. And then there's the you know, if you want to go for certification, DQ University has a training course that'll take you to be CPAC certified, and you don't need an enormous amount of technical knowledge to get to a point where you have that kind of certification. And that certification is really ideal for somebody who works with accessibility vendors, needs to oversee accessibility, project manages an accessibility team, and doesn't necessarily, you know the code or know how to do web development themselves. So there are kind of different niches and different disciplines within accessibility. So it does help enormously. Like, I have a 20+ year background in web development, so I mean, I can speak to this in a lot of detail, and it gets me a lot of cred with developers. But You don't absolutely need it to be able to be to be able to have an impact on accessibility.
Got it.
Agreed. Alberto is asking, do you have examples of companies that have great accessibility on their site? So this is one thing. So we can list 10 sites that have great accessibility practices. If you go that 30 days after, it changes because
Mm-hmm.
you may hire an agency to make your website accessible. And when you start entering new content, new images, it just stop being accessible. Accessibility it must be part of your process. So do you want to talk a little bit about there, Claudio?
Yeah, in terms of good examples, okay. I'm hoping we can get the head of accessibility from Zoom to be able to talk in one of these future talks. So I'm like talking to him, but Zoom has a maturity model for where they are on the journey towards accessibility is so far beyond other corporations, and the way they handle it is amazing. It is part of everything that they do. It is as natural to them as debugging code or speccing something for UX. I wouldn't point to their website necessarily, but they have far and away from video conferencing tools the one that's the most accessible across the board. One of the things in an interview I had a few weeks ago with them, they were talking about how people would come on board to Zoom, they're engineers, and they don't know necessarily, they're not hiring people who know accessibility, but it's so much a part internally of the process that you're going to pick it up, sink or swim within the first couple months. And so by the time you're there 3 or 4 months, you're already pretty well versed with accessibility best practices, in part because there's so much good knowledge sharing happening inside of the company that you're really learning from your colleagues and your peers as you're building. So it's a wonderful sort of utopian environment for the rest of us who live in companies that aren't necessarily as far along, in the life cycle. But if I can point to an example, Zoom for sure. I mean, they've thought about just about every single use case with every single disability, and they've developed for it. But yeah, that actually is a good question, because people are like, well, what do we show as examples? And the sad fact is 98% of the web, 98% of home pages have detectable issues on them. And this is from a sample of the million most trafficked web pages, a study that WebAIM did. So we're not in a state yet, where there's enough stuff there that you could point to. I would start with things like uk.gov, but that's been designed also for extreme accessibility to a level that's higher than what most commercial companies have to meet. And at that point, you do have a few design trade-offs that you have to take on to get to that AAA level.
Awesome. Well, I feel like we can talk about this all night. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. I know, Claudia, you mentioned you had some other upcoming events. You want to talk a little bit about that before we wrap up?
Yep. So next week, we have a talk with Bill Curtis Davidson, formerly of Magic Leap. He's a leader in the XR community that's focused on accessibility. So he can talk about virtual reality and how that intersects with accessibility. We're going to have Santiago Bolivar from the Dan Marino Foundation talk to us about how neurodiverse people can use XR to learn how to work, how to apply or how to use XR to basically, I'm missing the word, to try out situations that you find in a workplace before you actually go to an interview. So train yourself using XR before you actually go into a job interview or some sort of scenario like that. And we're going to get Chris from Very Big Things also, who's going to be speaking. So we're going to have 3 different segments, and that'll be 5 o'clock next Thursday. And like I said, I'm trying to get a meetup lined up for for the accessibility director of Zoom. I had an interview with him about 3 weeks ago that was absolutely fascinating, and I invited him to come on. So he's basically waiting for clearance from his company and from his corporate communications to let him speak about this. But the stuff that they're doing and the way they approach it is mind-blowing.
So thank
So
you.
where do we sign up for these, for the next week's talk?
Good question. Good question. So I'm going to post something on the IXDA website tomorrow. We're running a little bit behind in terms of, getting our act together with promoting stuff. I'm going to have it there. I'm going to be pushing stuff out on Slack and LinkedIn. And those of you who may not know me, please don't be shy about, sending me a LinkedIn connection request, and I'd be happy to follow up and send stuff to you guys. Or at least you can see stuff that I'll be posting in the timeline there.
Awesome. Well, listen, thank you so much, Claudio, rest of everyone who kind of joined. I know we went a little long as usual, but for the third installment, I think it was well worth it. There's a lot of this content that we're going to be putting together, just like we did for the last two. So I know, Jonathan, you've been a big part of that on the takeaways. We're going to be putting together another one of these recaps. So I mean, there's just a ton of information that I think was shared not only this month, over the last couple months, but I feel like everything kind of stacked nicely. And hopefully now for everyone looking to get into accessibility, anyone who actually wants to take their skills to the next level, obviously, Claudio, you've been a great resource to all of us, and I think a great friend and partner on the IXDA side. So thank you everyone who joined us, and we'll see you guys next month. Okay, well actually later this month.
Thank you, Claudio. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye,
you
guys.
guys.
Thanks, Claude. Thanks, Jonathan, for all your help, man. You've been amazing.
Thanks,
Yes.
you guys.
Yeah, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Hi, Joe. Marcelo.
Bye-bye.